Hi guys, welcome back. In this session what we're going to do is we're going to do one final quick little neat check to see our track is working. It's a nice little check that I like to do and it looks quite cool as well. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use the point cloud generator to actually generate a mesh, and then we'll have to clean up the mesh, and then we can export it for Maya and we can retopologize it and everything in there. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I've got this track and the points are following, looks great, cool. The fact that we deleted a load of points around the eyes gives us an opportunity here. So I'm going to check that this is working again by creating two spheres for the eyes. So if I hit tab on the keyboard, I can then just type in sphere and I can plug that into my scene node, okay? So anything plugged into your scene node, because your scene node's connected to the scanline renderer, it'll all come through. Okay, so if I hit tab on the keyboard, what I'm going to do is, what I want to do is line this up with the eye holes, okay? So on my sphere, I'm going to turn the uniform scale to like 0.1, I think, something around there. Yeah, 0.2, that'll do. So I'll just change that, yeah, 0.2. And then I can use this little gizmo just to move it up, these little X, Y, and Z lines. And let's move it across. And I'm going to move this then forward to where the eye would be roundabout, which is kind of roundabout here. Okay, so that's that one set up. It's only rough mind, so don't worry about getting it in the exact position that you think the eye should be. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take sphere 1, Control C, Control V. I've got another one, I've got two spheres now. So I'm going to double click sphere 2 because they're in the same place exactly on top of each other. Double click that one, and I'm going to bring this one across to the other side, alright? And just make sure, yeah, it's lined up. I also want to give them, if we come into our view by here, they're just completely black. So I want to give them a checkerboard texture, so I'll create a checkerboard node, and then I'll just connect the image up to there. So then what you can do is play through and just see that these eyeballs move with the actual footage. And they're a little bit too close together there, but just check that they move with the footage. So I'll pause mine as I play it in. Okay, so I actually turned my point cloud off so it's easier to see, and now if I play it through, you'll see that these little spheres actually do move with the eyes, which is great. Okay, so that's a nice little neat trick to kind of just check that your track is working. So I'm going to delete those spheres because I don't actually need them. Okay, so we know that our track is working because of those little spheres, okay? And that's really good because you can see that this camera has a green line linking it to the camera tracker. What that means is that if we make any changes to the camera tracker, resolve it, it'll update the camera, so the camera may actually change position. And we don't want it to do that because, to be honest, we're not going to make any more changes. We know it's working, so it's using processing power really, and it's using more resources to keep them linked. So what we want to do is we want to actually bake this data out. And by bake, what I mean by bake is we want to, we don't want it to be linked, okay? So in order to do that, what we need to do is just recreate this scene plus, but untick link output. So if I just delete this scene, okay, and come back to my camera tracker, I'm going to untick link output, and I'm just going to click create again, and it'll give us our lens distortion node, but we can delete that. And yeah, so we've got our camera, and now it's not linked, okay? And to be honest, I'm going to unlink my point cloud node from the camera tracker because we are done with the camera tracker and I don't want the computer to kind of keep looking at that. So this is what we've got. Okay, we've got our point cloud and our camera and everything like that. So what we want to do is we want to now create our mesh. So if we type in point cloud generator, we can now, we've got loads of different sources here. So source, that's going to be your footage, okay? Camera, well, funnily enough, that's going to be your camera. So if you just hook that up to camera, and then you've got something called mask. Now earlier we used this mask input, okay, and we're going to use it again. And this is why I said earlier that the kind of more solid and close you can get it, the better. If we just go ahead and use this point cloud generator, it'll generate points for everywhere in the frame, and we don't need to see where these doors are in 3D space. So what we're saying is, much like with the 3D tracker, we're just going to say, just concentrate within this area. So on our mask input by here, we've hooked it up. We just needed to click mask inverted alpha, okay? And that'll do the trick. So I'm just going to tidy this up a little bit, like so. Just put a joint in there. Joint or dot, whatever you want to call it. So our point cloud generator, then we can just have a quick look at that. It's not going to show us anything because it's in 3D and we haven't generated anything yet, but we've set it up all correctly. So let's have a look back at our footage just by coming to this dot by here. What we want to do is we want to play around with some of these settings. Now we need to give it keyframes to analyze. We can either click analyze sequence, and if we do that, let's just give it a little time to play through. Okay, by clicking Analyze Sequence, now that it's complete, it's saying that these frames here, these are the frames it needs to kind of generate a point cloud. Because what it's going to do, it's not going to use the tracking data. The only reason we did the tracking so far is to get that camera, all right? So it's not using any of those tracking points from earlier. What it's going to do, it's going to use the camera and the footage, and it's going to analyze how the camera's moving and how the footage moves, which is just the face, and it's going to generate a point from different pixels, okay, to build a mesh. So I'm not going to go into the ins and outs anymore of how it works, but what it needs for that is it needs multiple frames, because it can't just do it off one frame, because you can't see how far back the ear is in relation to the nose. So it's saying these frames here are really important, whereas these ones here aren't that important. And the reason it's saying those ones aren't that important is because there's not that much movement, okay? So where you'll see that it's from analyze sequences giving you more frames is because there's more movement in there. What I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to do every single frame. It'll take more time, but I can pause it. But it tends to be more accurate on how it's gone in the past. So you can analyze sequence. You can say, you can give it keyframes. So you can say, right, frame 198. You can add that, or if you want to add frame 214, just click add, and you'll see that's now blue, and you can basically add frames like that. Another way you can do it is say every 15 frames, add a keyframe for it to analyze and use to build this point cloud. So you can click 15, add all, and every 15 frames it'll give you one. I don't want to do that. I want to give it every single frame. So I'm going to go 1, and I'm going to add all of them, so every single frame. It's intensive on the computer, but it can give you a more solid result. Okay, so there's a couple other things before we click track points. So don't click track points yet. There's a few other things. So point separation. This is basically it's set to 2, so that's basically saying every 2 pixels it's going to create a point. So basically the lower this is, and you can go down to sub-pixel, but the lower this is, the better. If it was 10, it'll generate points every 10 pixels apart. So I'm going to select this to 1 just to make it a really dense mesh. Okay, and finally track threshold. So the lower the number that you put here is going to possibly give you a higher error. Okay, so if we hover over, let's just see, set the correlation threshold to terminate point tracks. Use a higher threshold to increase the accuracy. Basically, it's similar to it in the 3D tracker. It's looking for, the higher you put it, the more accurate it's going to be, okay? So I tend to put mine to 0.95, if not 1. But it's basically saying it needs it to be, if it was low, it doesn't need to be that contrasty of a point, but that may be inaccurate. So I tend to put mine 0.9, 0.95 should be fine. Okay, this is just accuracy. And again, this will take even longer now. Okay, so what I can do is I've set my point separation, the density, to really low, so it'll do it once every other pixel, and it'll look for more solider points. Now we've put it up here. I've said every single frame. So what we can do now is click track points. Now this will take a while, okay? It's probably take 20 minutes or something. So I'm just going to click track points for mine, and I'll grab you back in when I'll pause it, and I'll grab you when it's finished. So welcome back. My point cloud generator has now finished. So if we were to hook our viewer up and have a look, it takes us to our 3D view, and you can see that this is what I've got. Now the first time I did it, I actually forgot to set my mask here. So I'd linked my mask up, but I forgot to set it to mask inverted alpha, and I had that whole background in here, so I just redid it because I didn't like it. So yeah, this is what we've got. So you can see that for the most part it's working. I did have some red points in here as well. If you've got red points in here, what you can do is just click delete rejected points, because rejected them. Okay, so if we have a look, we've got a clear forehead and a nose and a mouth. We have got these extra points sticking out, which, you know, is fine. We'll get rid of them because we want, you know, a sort of smooth surface as best as possible. You'll also notice we've got some white pixels here, and I'll explain why we've got them. Okay, so if I view my footage, because it's used this roto, okay, so if I double click this roto, hopefully, yeah, because it's used this roto, it's actually going to pick up points and pixels from within this bright area by here. So that's where those bright pixels are coming from, okay, because we're getting pixels from within this mask. Now, it's important to note, a lot of people will be like, well, we had a point cloud earlier with this point cloud from the camera tracker, but the difference is the point cloud from the camera tracker, you can't make a mesh out of that data, and you can't click the individual points where we can in here. So we use the camera and the footage to generate points from the pixels, okay, and it's given us this, and it's a lot more dense, and we got a lot more control over the points as well because we got all this stuff in here. So what we need to start doing is we need to start actually cleaning some of this up, okay? So again, there's two methods. One method is if you, in your 3D view, go up to the top by here, you've got a little drop down, change to vertex selection, and I can actually click and drag, because I know this point by here, these sort of points on the outside, they're not going to be very good. So I can actually click and drag, and then I can click delete, and I can actually delete points like that, like these at the back. I don't know what these are doing, but I can delete them. And you couldn't do that with the point cloud from the camera tracker, so that's important. If, by the way, yours are very large, yours might be a lot larger than mine, so if they are, all you need to do is go to Edit, Preferences, and then scroll down to, once it loads, Viewer Handles, and 3D handle size. Yours will probably be set to 5 by default, and you know it's quite busy, but I've just brought mine down to like 2, just you can see the difference. Okay, so yeah, that's all you need to do. So I'm just going to click cancel so it goes back to what it was. And yeah, so first off, you're going to want to come around and you're just going to want to highlight some of these ones which are going to be problematic. Like we've got a few floating above the nose, and we don't want to use these when we generate our mesh. Okay, so just come around, and yeah, any of these now which you think are going to be problematic, you can just select and start deleting them. Okay, so I'll pause mine as I do a little bit of that. Alright, so I've just gone around and I've done a little bit of a cleanup. I could still probably, to be honest, I could still probably do some more. But I've done as much of a cleanup as I kind of want to at this stage, because there is another way that we can do this, okay? Again, I could spend so much time coming in here, and you could do it just this way if you wanted to. But for me, it kind of takes a while, so I'm going to show you the secondary way of doing it. So down in your point cloud generator, you've got something called angle threshold, and you've got something called density threshold. Now you can basically use these. If we hover over, let's see what they do. So threshold for the minimum triangulation angle, points with a large triangulation angle, that was a mouthful, are more accurate. So set a threshold of 0 to output all points. So if this was 0, it just shows you points wherever. And as you move this higher, you can see that some of them now are turning red, and that's because they're rejected points. If I just click turn this off, it won't show them, and you can just, you know, it starts eating away. So you want to find a balance. You want to make sure that you've got a smooth surface, but you want to make sure that you're getting rid of some of these ones out here. So it's looking, yeah, it's looking to get rid of some of them. Now density threshold, very similar. When you increase this, these points that are kind of like on their own, it'll get rid of. So when you increase the density threshold, the higher you increase this, the more points need to be close to each other to stay in. So you can see as I increase this, some of these points further away from the face, they start disappearing, okay? So points which tend to be on their own. So using a mixture of these, I'm just going to increase this. You don't want too many holes in your mesh, so it is a balancing act, okay? So something along the lines of, It's got a bit too many holes but there for me, so I may lower that down. Something along the lines of, I think, let's go for balancing act. See what we can get. Okay, so my angle threshold is 3.15. My density threshold is 0.74, and I think, even though I have got a few holes, actually I may just bring that down a bit. Yeah, I'm going to bring them down just a touch, actually. I think, to be honest, that should be okay. So I'm actually going 2.45 and then 0. Just call it 6. And just check the other side. Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. It doesn't matter that you've still got all these white points. That's fine. So next, we can actually generate a mesh from this. However, before we do, we just need to make sure that we click delete rejected points. So now, once you've done that, all those points will be deleted. Next, what you can do is select all of your vertexes, all of your points, because we're still in vertex mode. So if you're not, just make sure you're in vertex selection. Select them all, go to groups and create group. Okay, click that, and now you'll see you can assign it a different color if you want. I'm not going to bother. Well, okay, I am now. So if I want to make them yellow, click OK. You can see that they're all yellow. Okay. So once you've made a group, you can now bake that group to a mesh. So come down the bottom, and you've got bake selected groups or bake selected groups to a mesh. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a selected group to a mesh. So it's going to take all of these and tessellate a 3D mesh for the face. Now you've got something here called samples. Samples is effectively the quality to how smooth that mesh is going to be. You want it to be as smooth as possible, but also you don't want to lose the detail of, you know, the indent in the lips but there and the nose popping out. So it's a balancing act. So I'm going to first of all create a mesh at a sample of 1, then I'll probably do one at 2, and I'll unpause so we can analyze it. Okay, so my first mesh has come in, it's been created, and you can see I've got this node down here, baked mesh. So what I need to do is connect this to my scene, and I can hook my viewer up to the scanline renderer, or the scene node, to be honest, and we can swing around and we can have a look. Okay, so this is interesting. We've got a nice mesh here. Now what we need to do is we need to evaluate how smooth that is. So if we just double click this, we can now using there should be a little gizmo in there to move it to the side, but if not, just go to translate along the X and just like move this to the side. Okay, so 3.2. What we also need to do is create a light so we can actually see the surface properly, because if we don't create a light then we can't. So just plug our light into the scene and double click, so we've got a little gizmo. The reason we couldn't is we need to come out of vertex selection into node selection. So now if we double click, we should be able to like move this back. Yeah, so move this across and it should give us a good representation of what our mesh looks like. And let's come back just a little bit more. Just made a light, and yeah, you can see that actually that's quite good. It's got quite a defined nose, but it could actually probably be a little bit smoother, that mesh, I reckon. So what I'm going to try is I'm going to go back into my point cloud generator, and I'm going to turn samples to 2. And I'm going to see if I bake selected groups to mesh again, I'm going to see how smooth this mesh is in compared to the first one. Because if it's smooth and still kept the nose and the ears and the eyebrow kind of, I don't know what that's called, the, you know, the sort of the skull and everything, then, you know, we need to make that decision whether we go for a sample of 2 or 1 or in between. So my new mesh has been generated, so I'm just going to do the same. I'm going to plug this into the scene. I'm going to double click so I can now move this to the side, and we can now compare them both. So there's not a great, you can tell it's been a little bit smooth. So if you look at this ridge here in comparison to the ridge there, you can tell it's less. Have we still got a nose? Yes. Have we still got the ears? Yes. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for, they've both got pros to them. There's a little bit less of a sort of brow on this one than there is on this, and so I think I'm going to go for like 1.8 for my final one, because I can re-topologize this in Maya and smooth it in Maya. I'm not worried about that too much. But yeah, you can see just in the nose there's a little bit more of an indent in there. So I think I'm going to go for the final one, which I do. I'm going to make it 1.7, and I'm going to bake selected groups to mesh, and that'll be my final mesh that I'm going to export to Maya. So I've got my final mesh. I'm going to connect that to the scene, double click it, and let's have a quick view. Yeah, I think without looking too much at it, don't want to take too much time, I think that one's going to work for me. That's going to be fine, this mesh by here. So I'm going to delete the first two meshes that I made, like so. Make sure before we start exporting now, make sure that the baked mesh is all zeroed out, so it should be in the same position as your point cloud, because remember we moved everything into position earlier, so it should be at the origin, which it is. That's perfect, fine. So we got baked mesh. We want to export the camera and this mesh into Maya. So how do we do that? Well, if we get a merge geo node, merge geo node is like the merge node, but it just merges geometry. So merge geo, I can get number 1 and then another one, number 2. So I've got my camera. If I view here, it should be my camera and my baked mesh that I should see. Yeah, so I've got my camera moving around that mesh. Okay. What I can do then is I need to create a write geo node. So write geo, and I'll write the geometry out. So coming across to the write geo node, pretty simple really. We want an FBX, not an Alembic or an MXF or an OBJ. We want the FBX, okay, because that'll export the animation of the camera and everything. So give that a click. We've then got some stuff down here. Do we want to export a point cloud? Well, we could, but we haven't merged that geo in. So we could merge a point cloud in if we want to and use it in Maya, but that'll just be, we don't need it, to be honest. So turn point cloud off, axes off. We're not taking any lights. It's just camera and geometry. So with camera and geometry. And then basically you can just opt to where you're going to save it to. So if I go to, I'm saving it to Maya files, scenes, and Maya exports. You save it to kind of where's best for you, but I've already set up my Maya project and I've got sort of scenes folder and Maya exports. So if I go to Nuke exports, sorry. So yeah, I've got all my Maya files set up, and I'll go to scenes, Nuke exports, and I'll say face mesh, and I'm going to go version 2 because I did have another version in there from earlier. So face mesh version 2, and then click that, and finally what we can do is click execute, and it'll ask us what frame range do you want to do, and we're going to do 160 to 400 because that's where we're working at the moment. So click OK, and right, geo cannot be done for multiple frames. We haven't got FBX selected. It's because over here I should have put dot FBX at the end, and now just turn off point clouds, axis, and lights again. Sometimes if you set all this up before actually doing the file name and you don't put .fbx at the end, sometimes it just glitches out. So now if we go to execute 160 to 400, click OK, and you'll see it's playing through and it's going to export that out as an FBX file to use inside of Maya. So cheers for tuning in for that one. I'll see you in the next tutorial where we start looking at retopologizing our mesh, and actually where we can now start using this mesh. Okay, so cheers for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.